Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cardinals and kangaroos, welcome to Clarifying Catholicism. You're watching part 16 of a series on the history of the Ecumenical Councils according to the Catholic Church. Today we are covering the Second Council of Lyon. Much of this information was gathered from Joseph Kelly's The Ecumenical Councils of the Catholic Church, a History. So if you want an in-depth dive into these topics, make sure to pick up a copy of his book. Without further ado, on to the show. Last episode, we briefly mentioned Charles of Anjou, the French prince who broke his promise that he would rule Sicily as a papal fief. He did this because he wanted to reunite the fractured Western Empire without relying on the Pope's authority. At the same time, in 1261, the Byzantines recaptured Constantinople. Fearing an attack from the West, the Byzantines saw the tension between Charles and the popes, and hoped that by recognizing the supremacy of the Pope over all Christians, they could gain allies against the king. Basically, it was an enemy of my enemy is my friend scenario, only this time the Byzantines were willing to compromise their independence from Rome for it. Unfortunately, the Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII chose the wrong pope to do business with, since Pope Clement IV was actually a supporter of Charles's reign. After Pope Clement died, the cardinals debated for 3 years over who the next pope would be. Finally, in 1271, they chose Gregory the Tenth, a skilled diplomat and a holy man. Less than 3 weeks into his papacy, he called a council in Lyon, which was well beyond Charles's influence. Interestingly, a theologian named Thomas Aquinas was invited to attend, but he died on the way, unfortunately. While most bishops wanted to address the ongoing Muslim occupation of the Holy Land, Gregory had other plans as well. He saw how desperate the Byzantine Empire was and made reunion with them a priority. He also, having experienced life in the Crusader states, had a strong distaste for luxurious clergy. Similar to the popes who convened the last few councils, Gregory committed himself to fighting corruption, perhaps stronger than anyone had done so far. Now, the first conciliar text called for a new crusade and taxes to support it. The next touched on a very important theological matter that divided the East and the West. The Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed, discussed a few episodes back, mentions how the Holy Spirit proceeds from God the Father. Around the year 1000, to reflect developments in Christology, several bishops added the words, "and from the Son." Episode 11 talked about how the Great Catholic Orthodox Schism in 1054 occurred largely because of frustrations Eastern bishops had with Western bishops ordering them around and Latinizing their culture. However, theologically, this addition to the ancient creed would be cited as the straw that broke the camel's back. Once Western churches added the words "and from the Son" to the creed, which Eastern bishops believed could never, under any circumstance, be modified, even if such modifications were true, anti-Western sentiments were inflamed. So, coming back to 1274, Gregory's insistence that Michael VIII and the Byzantines accept these words signified the East's acceptance of the West's supremacy over them. Michael, knowing the fate of his territory depended on this, accepted Gregory's offer, and the Byzantine Empire was, once again, humiliated by Rome. However, Michael's agreement with the West was totally unsupported by his fellow Byzantine citizens. This deal was especially despised by the clergymen, especially given the lingering resentment from that Fourth Crusade's destruction of Constantinople. The reunion hardly lasted any time at all. The council also dealt with how new religious orders should be addressed, indicating that Lateran IV's ban on new religious orders was, well, ignored. Finally, recognizing the great turmoil that came from 3 years it took to elect a pope, the council decreed that cardinals should meet no less than 10 days after the pope's death, that they should be locked in a room, and if the cardinals could not choose a pope within 3 days, their meals would be limited to 1 course at lunch and dinner. If after 8 days there was still no pope, their meals would be downgraded to just bread, water, and wine, and they would lose all of their revenue as long as the conclave lasted. While his decree of unity with the Byzantines fell through, most of Gregory's reforms at Lyon were successful, though he was never able to launch another crusade, having died in 1276. 15 years later, Muslim armies captured the last remaining Crusader stronghold, and the Crusades were over. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Clarifying Catholicism. See you next time.